In this video, I will discuss setting up analysis periods in Power BI for your Sage 50 data. In this context, an analysis period is simply a collection of dates over which you would like to summarize your Sage 50 data. Now, you already have that in Sage 50, of course, because you have your accounting periods. So in Sage 50, you have analysis periods defined, which are most likely months and years, which define your accounting periods. So one of the things that I will be discussing today, and hopefully will come out of the video, will be why you would want to do something that is different from or addition to what you already have in Sage 50, but within Power BI. I will discuss different types of analysis period that you may want to set up: fixed analysis periods or dynamic analysis periods, true or false analysis periods, or analysis periods that categorize your dates. I will then take that and look at some very practical examples that I use within my content pack for Sage 50. And actually, you can see those on the right-hand side of my screen here. I currently have 27 different analysis periods set up, but it's quite easy to change those and add to those if I need to. Then what we will do is we will roll our sleeves up and get our hands dirty. And I'll show you a simple example of how to create a simple true-false analysis period within your dates table. And using that command, you can actually use that to create perhaps 90% of the analysis periods that you'll ever want to use in Power BI. And then I will take that and I will show you two ways in which you can use your analysis period within Power BI. One as a visual filter, just to filter out data within a particular visualization, and also within a calculation filter to act as a filter within a calculated measure. At the end of this video, what I will do is I will share with you an offer that actually, if you want to connect your Sage 50 system to Power BI, then I'm happy to share with you a template content pack that I use actually as the basis for my content pack for Sage 50. So I'll share with you a template Power BI desktop file that you can use within your own Power BI desktop as a shortcut, and it will save you weeks of setting up your Power BI desktop environment for Sage 50. But we'll come on to that at the end of the video. So firstly, I discussed what an analysis period is. What it is as I say, it's a collection of dates over which you want to summarize your Sage 50 data. And as I've also said, you have those already defined in your Sage 50 system. So what might you want to do differently in Power BI? And that actually comes to moving towards a more dynamic analysis of your data instead of a fixed and rigid analysis of your data. Because actually, if you think about it, your accounting periods you have set within your Sage 50 system, there are advantages and disadvantages to that because they're fixed. Okay, so if you have a printed report showing October sales for 2017, that is absolutely October sales for 2017. And if you look at that report in a month's time, it will still be correct. But and Power BI can do that. And you can reproduce everything you have in Sage 50 in terms of your accounting periods in Power BI. And that will deliver benefits. It will enable you to visualize the data a lot more effectively. It will enable you to share your reports more easily and drill down into the information more easily. But if that's all you do within Power BI, then I think you're missing a trick. Because one of the things that Power BI does really nicely is work with dates. And one of my favorite things to do within Power BI is to create what I would call dynamic analysis periods. And these are analysis periods relative to today, for example. So on the right-hand side of my screen, you can see different analysis periods that I've got defined. And you can see actually that many of them, in fact, most of them, are relative to today. So I've last 28 days. So that defines a period which is the last 28 days. And tomorrow, that period will actually be different because tomorrow is a different day to today, and so on. The other aspect of these analysis periods is that most of these produce a true or false result. Okay, so actually, if we look at the formula for creating this last 28 days, is an if-then statement or an if statement. If the date is less than today minus 28, then false. And if it's less than today, true, otherwise false. And basically that means if it's in the last 28 days, true, otherwise false. And just a simple true-false statement for my analysis period makes it incredibly easy to reuse this throughout my Power BI model, either as a filter within a visualization or as a filter within a calculation. And that's why I like to define them as true or false categories. But they're not all true or false categories. I have some, they're not all true or false analysis periods. I have some categories that I use as well. And we'll come on and we'll have a look at some examples of that in a minute. Now, the next thing that I actually want to show you is some examples of what I've got set up, but I'll just briefly describe what these different analysis periods mean that I've got set up. This doesn't mean that you have to do it this way. Of course, you might want to do it a different way. But for the first two, I have aged period and aged weeks. That's largely for looking at receivables within my Sage 50 system, receivables within my Sage 50 data. The aged period just mirrors what I have in Sage 50, and aged weeks looks at it from a weekly point of view, and we'll look at that in a minute. I have a simple filter to say, is it last year or this year? And that's because if I'm pulling in a lot of data into my Power BI system, I may only actually want to look at this year's data and last year's data. I may not be interested in anything that's older than that. And that's just a simple filter to pull it out. Then I have a series of filters: last 28 days, last 52 weeks, last 56 days, last 7 days, last 91 days. Now, one of the things you might notice about this is that they are all multiples of 7 days. Now, again, you don't have to do it like this way, but there's a reason why I've chosen multiples of 7. And that is because if you choose any group of 7 contiguous dates, you'll always have the same number of Saturdays and Sundays and Mondays and Tuesdays of a given day of the week. You'll always have the same mix. So the last 28 days will always have 4 Saturdays, 4 Sundays, 4 Mondays, 4 Tuesdays, and so on. So that's the reason I've gone for multiples of 7, because then on a rolling period basis, you're always excluding public holidays, you're always counting like for like. And so it's much easier to track trends from one day to the next. Now, you can get it into a debate about whether you go last 28 days, whether you go last 35 days or whatever. Now, I've chosen as my core periods within my content back, 1 day, 7 days, 28 days, 91 days, 364 days. And again, there are advantages and disadvantages. You can get theoretical and say, well, actually, in theory, 35 days would be a better slot because most businesses have a peak of activity at around month's end. And if you go for 35-day slots, you will always have a month's end within that slot, and you'll always have 1 month end. But to me, mentally, 28 days is a little bit easier to grasp. It's 4 weeks. It's a very natural human cycle. It's a cycle of the moon. It's a very natural thing. Much easier to visualize 4 weeks than it is 5 weeks, I think. So that's why I've gone for 28 days. And most 28-day analysis periods will incorporate a month's end. But as I say, not all. So there are swings and roundabouts, and you can use your own judgments on this. What I'd like to do is take a quick look at how we might use some of these examples. And the easiest way to do that is to actually go into my content pack, and we can see different examples there. So what we have here is a number of pages from the content pack. I'm not going to go into all of the details, but I'm just going to point out different areas in which I've used different analysis periods and why. Okay, so we're on page 1, which is the forecasting page. And here I'm using an analysis period this month and next month and this year. So again, for forecasting, of course, you want to look at next month. And also within these tables here, I'm using this month to present summaries of my forecast and my actual sales for this month. So those are 2 analysis periods that I'm using, or 3 actually, that I'm using. And they're simple true or false analysis periods. Is this date this month, or is this date next month? In this next example, I'm showing the rolling example of last 28 days. So this is doing sales analysis over the last 28 days. And I've got a simple headline here, sales last 28 days. Tomorrow, this will be different, okay? Or it might be. If I make any sales today, that number will be different tomorrow. So it's a rolling analysis period, and I think very useful to look at as an indicator every single day of the week. In the next example, we're looking at the use of the 91 days. In fact, it's next 91 days as an analysis period. And again, I use this for forecasting. So if we're looking at product demand, maybe for products that I have a long lead time on, this is a product demand forecast for next 91 days. And again, it's going through the dates on my dates table. True or false, is this date in the next 91 days? If so, it appears within this list. Now, in this example, we're looking at some different uses of analysis periods. And instead of true or false analysis periods, what I'm using are categories. So I'm taking dates, I'm taking each date in my dates table, and I'm applying a category to it. And we can see those down the right-hand side. And the reason why I'm applying those categories is so that within Power BI, I can use a simple slicer to point and click and select the different date periods that I want to view this data in. So at the moment, I've got no filters applied. I just want to use slicers to apply visual filters to this data. So I've got one analysis period, which is a categorization period, which looks at a set of dates and it just puts those dates into this year or last year or another, but I've got that filtered out of this particular view. And that's nice because it enables me to just have a slicer. What do I want to look at? Do I want to look at just this year? Then automatically my data on my screen is filtered by this year. Or I want to look at this year and I want to look at September. So again, what we're looking at is another analysis period I've got here for months. And these happen to be, in this particular example, my company is operating on a calendar year basis. So 01 January, 02 February, and so on. But equally, I could have months categorized as 01 October, 02 November, and so on, if my financial period started in October. So again, I have an analysis period called months, and you'll see that back in my desktop file. And again, we're using this to drive a slicer. It's not so elegant to use as filter for calculations, and a filter for calculations, a simple true or false is a lot more effective. And again, I've got another categorization analysis period here called rolling period, where again, I'm putting each date into a bucket of whether it's in the last 7 days, the last 8 to 28 days, the last 29 to 91 days, or the last 92 days plus. So those are examples of my different analysis periods that I may have set up. I wanted to just show you another couple of examples within my desktop environment around the receivables side of things. So flick onto this page here. Okay. So I'll just maximize the screen view. Okay. And again, just some different examples. On the top right-hand side of the screen here, we're using the aged weeks analysis period, and we're just showing overdue and within due balances by aged weeks. And I think that gives a much more dynamic view of your receivables than spreading it out, say, over last 30, 60, 90 days and so on. But we've also reproduced that here, which is what I currently have set up as analysis periods within Sage for aged debt. And again, on the receipts table here, I'm also using last month, this month, next month, different analysis periods that I've defined within my table there. So that's just a simple example of the different types of analysis period. Most of these that I have here are true or false. Most of them are dynamic, as in they're picking up a period that is relative today. And that's really difficult to do within Sage 50, but incredibly easy to do within Power BI. And it takes something that might be otherwise a very static and rigid and perhaps quite old report and turns it into something that's a lot more dynamic and that changes every day, and actually potentially during the day, depending on how you set up the refresh of your data within your data from Sage 50. What I'm going to show you now is then just a couple of ways, a very simple example of how you create one of these simple true or false analysis periods. If we go back to our page, I'll get rid of this title. I don't need that anymore. You know what we're watching. Okay, so you see here, I've got an analysis period for the last 28 days. And that's a simple if statement. If the date is less than today minus 28, then it's false. If it's less than today, then it's true, otherwise false. And I'm going to do the same I'm going to create an analysis period for the last 30 days. So I'll create a new column. And the reason I use a calculated column here rather than a measure is because this is a fundamental building block in my model that I'm going to use again and again and reuse for different summarizations in my Power BI model. And more about whether to use columns or measures in perhaps another video. So last 30 days, I said. Spell if 8 less than today minus 30 false. Otherwise, if 8 is less than today, true. Otherwise, false. And that's my new analysis period for last 30 days set up. I can do a quick check. I would always advise you whenever you're creating calculated columns or measures within Power BI, always do a very, very quick check that it's worked for you. So what I'll do is I'll just pop the dates in And I'm going to choose my not regular date view. And I'm going to apply a filter to those dates for the last 30 days. And straight away, I can see there are only 30 days that are true. I apply a filter to that. I can see it starts on the 27th of September and goes through to the 26th of October, which is correct. Okay, so I have my filter. Now, the next thing I want to do is just show you, once you've got that filter, there are really two things that you can do with it. One is you can simply to apply a visual filter to your data, which is actually what I just did there. Okay, so if I, let's say, create a card, and on that card I want to put my sales number. I've got a field in my sales invoice detail called sales, and there it's showing a figure of 3.29 million. On its own, it's a bit meaningless, actually, because that's just a total of all the sales that I have from my Sage 50 data in my Power BI. It says nothing about the dates. But what I'll do is I will apply this last 30 days as a visual filter to this information. All I need to do is just drag that and select true. And now I see I've got 87K worth of sales in the last 30 days. Okay. Now that's one way of doing it, where you just apply the true false analysis period to a visualization. Another way of doing it is to apply it as a filter to a calculation. And if there's only one calculation you ever learn how to do, learn this one. So I'm going to create a new measure within my sales invoice details, which is going to be sales last 30 days. I'm going to call it sales last 30 days equals. The formula I'm going to use is my favorite Power BI formula. I'm just going to calculate sum X. The table I'm using is sales invoice details. And the expression is a simple expression. I'm just summing the sales, okay? And calculate sum X function, then I can apply filters to it, which is why I like it so much. I can just add my dates filter. Whoops. Dates last 30 days. And that's the filter I just created. What I've done is I've created a calculated summary of sales and applied my analysis period of the last 30 days as a filter to that. Very elegant. It's very simple. Now I have that. Let's create another card and let's drag or add the last 30 days to that. And you see I've got the same number, okay? But this one, I'm displaying the calculation, which is summarized by 30 days. This I'm summarizing, I'm filtering the visualization. So if I turn that filter off now, this one reverts to 3.29 million, whereas my calculated, filtered calculation, sales last 30 days, is not affected by turning that filter off. So in summary, what I've discussed is how within your dates table, you can create a whole set of analysis periods that can turn otherwise kind of static, fixed reports into something that's a lot more dynamic, that changes on a daily basis. I've suggested, but not mandated, that using multiples of 7 for rolling periods is a really good idea, because that always balances the same number of different days of the week. I've shown if you add these analysis periods to your dates table, you can reuse them as filters within visualization filters within your report, also as filters within calculations. I've shown that you can use them as simple true-false filters, which is wonderful for calculations purposes, or you can use them as categorization filters like we saw for months and year, which is wonderful if you're wanting to display slices where you visually slice your data within the system. Now, it's all very straightforward to set up, but what I have to offer you is an opportunity to save an awful lot of time in doing that, because if you, before the end of November 2017, if you connect your Sage 50 system up to a trial account with Cintiq, install your connector and get your data connected, what I will do is I'll send you a copy of this Power BI template file with all these analysis periods already built in for you, and it will save you weeks of work. All you have to do that is, on this YouTube channel, go to the playlist How to Connect Your Sage 50 Accounts to Power BI and follow the instructions there. If you've enjoyed this video, please follow us, because there's a whole, or please subscribe to this channel, because there's a series of additional videos coming out. In fact, the next one is already scheduled for next Friday, where we'll be talking about new ways to visualize your receivables in Power BI.